Okay, hello everyone. We're really excited to be able to present to you some of the synthesis that's come out of the research effort and to present some of the design opportunities. I'm Ricky from Gensler, we're Team Uplift, and with me I have Jack from Arab, Cecil from Margie Ruddick Landscape, John from Stamen UCLA, and Amitav from HRNA. And you see here, these are the kind of skill sets that we actually bring in terms of how we need to kind of deal with resilience and solve that. When we started conversing with some of the kind of experts and the community, I think we realized that there was this common thing that the communities were being squeezed between the surging tides and the kind of surging kind of housing issues and economic factors. And so we're really working within the interface of that. The one question that we asked ourselves, and we were really interested when we were doing our analytical kind of research phase, is really about finding that one place where we can apply this kind of acupunctural intervention that really has a positive impact kind of regionally in the Bay Area. So it was really about understanding it sort of economically, ecologically, and socially, but it was really about making sure that there was the move that we actually do had local benefit, but also impacted things regionally as well. So these are our four kind of strategic goals, and we talk about how we need to develop a kind of a local solution, and we also need to make sure that it's kind of an equitable solution. So it's not us just coming up with a solution, but working with the community to do that. And then from there, figuring out how do we focus in on a solution that begins to think about environmental innovation and economic displacement, but also the solution needs to be really robust in many ways and needs to be scalable. So when we talk about this, right, so what does it really mean to design a lasting future for the Bay Area? We already know there's $130 billion of value of structures in the floodplain. Again, so how do we protect for that? If we think about, like, there's 30% growth happening in between 2010 and 2040 in the Bay Area. So how do we think about the growth aspect? When we think about trans-Bay corridors, and even the study that's been done right now suggests that there's 152% capacity in 2040. So how do we think about moving goods and people? And then there's really only 20% of the Bay shoreline that's accessible. So how do we kind of engage that? Each of these systems actually don't run independently. And when we think about resilience, we want to make sure that we think about all these four things together.
So given the complexity and the gravity of this challenge, our team approached the research phase eager to listen and to learn from the regional experts, from the resilience experts and the community leaders to find out really what they had to teach us about resilience. So looking back at the last 10 weeks or so of our process, it wasn't surprising to realize that really our most vital insights came from walking through neighborhoods and through talking with community leaders and really being led by those who have dedicated their lives and their careers to protecting communities in the Bay Area. So besides our external outreach effort, our team actually leaned heavily as well on our subject matter experts to conduct qualitative and quantitative research and also to synthesize a wealth of information into our design workshops that we conducted internally as a team. Together it was our external outreach and our internal workshops that really gave us the insights that we built on over the design concepts that Ricky and Cecil will be talking about in a few minutes. So taking a step back for a second, our team was also very eager to identify sites early on so that we could actually talk with members of the community and trade ideas before developing fully formed concepts. So we started with over 50 sites and what felt like limitless problems and opportunities to work through. And from these 50 sites, we really narrowed it down to 10 particular sites. And from those, we really found that 2 in particular, we looked north, south, east, and west, but we found that West Oakland and East Palo Alto were the 2 sites that really presented the greatest opportunities for our team to build resilience and to achieve our goals within the strategy that we outlined. So in terms of the approach that we took to screening the different sites and through our site selection process, we didn't want to approach this in an arbitrary way and simply select sites based on gut feel or intuition. We wanted to take a more data-driven approach that was really informed by science. So we began that by outlining these 6 key stressor categories, which we found to be the most prevalent in the Bay Area and also the most relevant to resilience. So with these 6 key factors outlined, we were able then to subdivide those into very specific research areas. So for example, within seismic risk, we looked at liquefaction potential around the bay and identified sites that were really most vulnerable to that hazard. Within equity, for example, we looked at the spatial distribution of gentrification and displacement risks, and we looked at those throughout all of the sites within the bay. And down the list we went until we had data that really informed our selection process and allowed us to compare sites side by side. So with these 6 key stressor categories identified and looking at these across our 4 strategic goals, our team developed a screening matrix that had over 50 factors and over 51 sites. And really this matrix provided a tool to our team to allow us to evaluate sites in really a more objective way. And looking at all of the sites and looking at all of the factors that we took into account, from flooding to housing to mobility to ecology, again, we came back to 2 sites in particular, West Oakland and East Palo Alto, that really spoke to our team and really, we thought, presented the greatest opportunities for us to have high-level regional impacts from very localized interventions. And from this research, we were also able to tentatively identify our intervention area and begin designing the concepts that Ricky and Cecil will be walking through.
So the first site we're going to be talking about is the Oakland Gateway area. And what's really interesting about this area, again, is it's very rich in many ways, and all this infrastructure, it's a real 3-dimensional equation and solution where there's so many different factors that come together. One of the most important things about it is that Oakland already has this kind of vibrant character, its color, its richness to it. So making sure that we actually understand what that is and work with that as a basic framework is really important. But again, with that, how do we create kind of new experiences on top of that? And how do we connect these experiences together? And how do we work with the community to really figure that out? So when we're balancing opportunities here, it's really about thinking about environmental justice, gentrification, and displacement in many cases. But can we actually build something actually adjacent to for example, like West Oakland, to increase opportunity, but also create something that actually benefits the community adjacent to it as well? And is there a way to manage displacement with that? And then is there a way of really thinking about how do we, the risk of sea level rise and flooding in so many different ways and different typologies? So in terms of the constraints, again, sea level rise, we need to figure out what we do. There's actually 2 vulnerabilities in that area. What do we do with the East Bay mud and the water waste treatment plant? And how do we think about some of the investments that are actually in the liquefaction zones? We're thinking about growing the community because of growth. It's like, if we think about displacement, affordability of housing, gentrification, what do we do with that? Are there ways of preparing for this 30% rise in jobs and housing needs? In terms of moving, again, infrastructure is a huge thing. Infrastructure actually could connect, but in many cases it does divide. So how do you actually create infrastructure that begins to provide value for its adjacencies? And again, with kind of mobility and infrastructure, are there ways of thinking about it from a health and wellness perspective? And if we want to engage, how do you actually get a community to connect back to the bay? We have an operating port. There's all this rail infrastructure, but how are the ways that we do that? And then sometimes, in many cases, here with Oakland and Alameda, the estuary kind of divides up those communities. So how can we connect those things together? So the first design opportunity and concept that we talk about is bridging communities through uplift. So the first thing we do is protect the edges, Gateway Park, also down on the southern side where the estuary is. In terms of growing, there's opportunities of creating and utilizing the underutilized rail areas and to be able to create a deck and a community above that. There's also opportunities to kind of ease some of that growth pressure as well. In terms of moving, can we actually rethink the I-880 corridor and see what we can actually do with that? Can we also reorganize some of the port logistics? Remember all the pollution, the air pollution, all of those things are coming from there, but how do we actually mitigate some of that so there's some advantages for the community? And then is there a way to create this kind of eco-connection between Alameda and Oakland? And in terms of engaging, again, if we create this new deck above the railway, is there a way of creating this kind of new connection, bringing green and water closer to West Oakland, but also being able to get closer to the water from West Oakland as well. And then is there a way of creating that connection to Oakland? So the strategies here are kind of a synthesis in terms of our concepts of what we're thinking of doing. It's really, again, thinking about how do we intertwine the kind of ecological and urban conditions, so it's not isolated, but how do we use that to our advantage? And we do that in order to be able to protect, grow, engage, and move people. So this is thinking about things three-dimensionally. You see the existing is at the top, and then you see a section at the bottom. The section shows how you can actually have a dialogue between West Oakland and this new community in terms of what we do with kind of new opportunities for managed development. And you can see that the rail logistics and the rail is below. You also have new opportunities for habitat and job growth and new parks as well. This is just another variation of that. And again, there's no single solution to this, right? So we need to work with the community to figure out what those things are going to be. And again, some of the stuff is driven obviously by policy and regulatory aspects, but thinking about those economic aspects as well will begin to kind of change this around. And this is a conceptual image of what we want to say. We want to really connect some of these communities to the Bay, but really thinking about the operational aspects. The port needs to operate, but through clever ways of using design and working with the community, we'll be able to connect some of these connections that allow for these new opportunities that are given in that text. So new jobs, new housing, farmers market, opportunities for sports, constructed wetlands, really talks to about the culture and diversity of this new place.
We found the challenges and opportunities in this area so compelling and complex that we developed another concept for it. Using some of the moves that we have shown in our previous concept, but really shifting our focus towards bringing water in and using it to connect communities from Gateway Park to Alameda. Our concept reimagines the regional infrastructure, which has disproportionately negatively impacted West Oakland, and in particular the wastewater treatment plant, which will become increasingly vulnerable with sea level rise, more severe rain events, and increasing populations. While the sea level rise protection will happen primarily along the shoreline with both hard and soft protective infrastructure, we saw an opportunity to use the 880 right-of-way to address some of the current and impending issues by transforming the spaces under and adjacent to the highway with a green, spongy corridor. We can treat wastewater with wetlands, provide habitat and open space, provide a green buffer for highway air pollution, provide land that acts as a sponge during flooding events, and create a new and protected bay trail. The corridor would link Gateway Park through West Oakland and down to Alameda, where we're proposing a new bridge to connect West Alameda to Oakland, providing a critical missing link. The right-of-way actually closely aligns with the historic shoreline, and by transforming this land, we're reconnecting two parts of the bay that were historically tied together. In an area so cut off from the bay, we think it's critical to provide more ways and spaces of engaging with the bay and to use water as cultural placemaking, understanding that resiliency is not just about flood protection, but also about creating social cohesion. This likens to cities with canal networks. The canals were often built to control for flooding, but over time have become iconic elements of the city, and we see that by creating a sense of place and strengthening community. At the southern end of our site, the Oakland estuary currently forms a barrier between Oakland and Alameda. By bridging the estuary, we can connect communities, activate both sides of the estuary, as well as provide more access to the water and evacuation route during disasters. By reconfiguring the existing transportation arteries, including undergrounding the rail, we can create space for development, improve the air quality, and reduce neighborhood traffic. Further north towards the Bay Bridge, the existing conditions show the breadth of land devoted to the rail and 880 corridor. Our concept transforms this land into a blue-green corridor, and while we likely won't be able to absorb all 63 million gallons of water currently treated by the wastewater plant daily, a series of constructed wetlands within the corridor could treat some of that wastewater, allowing for infiltration and improved water quality discharge to the bay. We also see that those wetlands could act as habitat, providing a missing link between the Emeryville Crescent Marsh and down to the Oakland Estuary and San Leandro Marsh. Adjacent uses could include recreation areas and other floodable programs so that during storm events, there's more land to absorb water. The anchor of our blue-green corridor is the bridge to Alameda, which will integrate mixed-use development so that people can work where they live, enhance the park system and transportation network through dedicated bus lanes and bike lanes and open space, reduce traffic and commute times by providing a more direct route to the East Bay, and most importantly, connect two communities, creating a stronger, more resilient Oakland and Alameda.
So the third site that we're going to be talking about is the East Palo Alto and the Barton Bridge crossing area. And I just want to preface this just right now is that basically that there's really some complicated regulatory aspects down there. In terms of growth, I think, we need to think about how we can think about evolution of cities in the future. And so we're looking more for long-term as kind of like the 2050 aspects. Again, East Palo Alto, I think amazing character, the richness, so how do we keep that as a foundation? How do we introduce some of these new experiences? But again, here, it's about how do you actually create this, how do you build on the bay and kind of still maintain some of that ecological aspect? So how do you do an intervention that may not have much impact actually on the bay, but will improve other aspects? Again, we need to protect some of the edges. Thinking about growth, those three communities there, we talked about East Palo Alto, and Menlo Park. Think about affordability. Again, how do we move the Dumbarton Bridge itself and the damaged or the rail corridor? How do we begin to connect those things together? And how do we think about engaging with the water and so that the water actually becomes a destination as well? So the third one we call habitat opportunities above and below. So again, we'll protecting the edges of EPA from sea level rise and flooding with a new typology. Is there a way to improve jobs and housing by thinking about the opportunity actually by the water, thinking about transportation in terms of new ferry connections, again, thinking about a multifaceted bridge system that begins to tie together all these types of different modes of transportation. And then how do we engage, and it's really this opportunity zone, is there a way of creating this habitable intervention on the bay? So these are some of the strategies that we're thinking about need to all come together in terms of being able to move, protect, engage, and grow this area. So here's a section basically showing that kind of intervention that is actually on the bay. We're thinking about this thing as how do you get back to some of the natural kind of tidal flows, but is there something that we can actually create that can really think about managed displacement and other opportunities for habitat and housing. So we call this one, again, this conceptual image, really it's the bay as home and its destination, as opposed to the bay just being a thoroughfare.
As you heard earlier from Ricky, that the economic lens played a very important role, not just in identifying the sites and identifying the interventions in terms of where they will go, choosing the areas where they'll have the greatest impact and communities around them which have been the most stressed in the Bay Area. But it also plays a really important role in our thinking around the types of interventions that will have greatest long-lasting impacts. I think all of these interventions unlock tremendous value, tremendous economic value for the region, as well as for the communities around them. And I think the test of these strategies are going to be how can we capture that value and deploy it in a manner that it just doesn't think about flowing back to the infrastructure itself, but have long-lasting impacts in the community. So I think that's going to be a critical piece of our thinking as we think of developing these solutions so that these impacts stay in the community and the communities have the greatest benefit.
West Oakland and East Palo Alto are caught between two surges, rising sea level and rising housing prices. And community members legitimately fear that design solutions that help them become more resilient to climate change will exacerbate gentrification and squeeze them out. We recognize that listening is going to be even more important in this next phase of the challenge, to hear lift up the community concerns, their visions, and solutions. And we will bring all of the professional know-how, creativity, and resources we possibly can to the table. but we are committed to respecting the communities in place, human and ecological, and putting them at the center of our approach so that they can participate and benefit not as objects of promises about the future, but as subjects of their own destiny. And we look forward to working with you together as we do this. Thank you.